Hey there, fourth graders. It's Mr. Remedies with our fourth and final fairy tale lesson of the week. It's been a pretty quick week. Pretty interesting lessons, I do have to say. Uh, I don't know about you guys, but I've been pretty surprised about how complex and in-depth fairy tales can get. So let's keep on keeping on. Let's finish up on a strong note. Today, we're talking about how fairy tales and the lessons we learn from them reflect what the culture of the story may or may uh, believe. As always, we have some learning goals. Today, we are learning to understand that the outcome or lesson of a fairy tale reflects what the culture might value. Only two success criteria today. Mr. Remedy's taking it easy on you today. Success criteria number one, I can define cultural value. Number two, I can identify the lesson and outcome of a fairy tale. I think if you do those two things, boom, you'll be right in line to be successful today. Let's go ahead and look at that vocabulary word. The word is cultural value, or the term is cultural value. A cultural value is the core ideals that a community believes. Right? It is a kind of a way, a general way that people may live their life, or kind of an idea that helps direct how they treat others, or an attitude they might have towards something in their life. So when we talk about values, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about like big personal ideas. So let's look at an example of really how this can shake out and how we can connect the lesson we learn in a fairy tale to what the culture of that fairy tale may believe. We're going to do that with the story Domitilla. I apologize if I mispronounced that. This is our Cinderella story from the Mexican tradition. And remember, in this story, Domitilla is a young girl whose parents kind of raised her with a good work ethic. They encouraged her to learn quite a few skills, especially in cooking and leather work. And unfortunately, her mother falls ill, and the house that they're living in doesn't have time to dry because of the adobe bricks. And so she is not forced, but she goes to the governor's mansion to get a job as a cook in their kitchen. And through her work, she gains notoriety for her her fantastic cooking skills. Um, but she has to return to her home, and the governor's son chases after her. Um, After initially just kind of disregarding her cooking skills because of the area that she came from, um, and kind of being underestimated. So we want to look at a couple of different things. First, we want to identify the country or the culture of origin. So for the place of origin, this comes from Mexico. I don't think it can show up very well on the PowerPoint slide, but it on the cover of the book it says a Cinderella tale from the Mexican tradition. Right? Uh, the lesson that we end up learning in this is, your typical lesson that you learn from a Cinderella story. However, this one has a very interesting spin on it. Um, we are told very early on that work, helping others, and love are very important things to have in one's life. Right? But as always, we want to examine the text evidence. We want to, how do we think to ourselves, how do I know that that's my lesson? Well, the author includes proverbs. Really early on in the story, we are told that Domitia's mother kind of had this saying, this proverb that she would repeat when doing, the chores around the house or working on a project, and that was do every task with care and always add a dash of love. So if you have kind of a proverb or kind of one of these like really cool sayings about attitude like this, then that is something that you value. And we can see that if it's repeated often enough by enough people within a community, that becomes a cultural value. So we just can really see that perhaps, or definitely, it's a definitely that the people of this region value hard work, helping others when in need, and that love, especially love of family, is incredibly important. So, fairly good thing to realize that this story helps us understand what this particular culture really values. Let's look at a different example. For us, we're going to the Persian Cinderella. It's a story we've talked about for a couple of days now. Okay, now remember, typical Cinderella story or traditional Cinderella story. You have a young girl. She has a birthmark shaped like a star on her cheek. So she thinks that she's maybe not as beautiful or as attractive as the other women in her family. The other women in her family definitely treat her very cruelly. Um, and then she gets her moment to shine a little bit when the prince throws a celebration for the new year and invites the women of the town to his palace. Then her father gives her some pocket money to go down to the market, the bazaar. However, she comes across a magical jug that gives her these fine clothes and this pretty piece of jewelry. And then, she falls in love with the prince himself and lives happily ever after. Right? But we can also understand what this cultural values, especially during the time of this story's origin, by doing the same thing we did with Domitio, tearing it apart, coming through with some categories, and just really examining it from a critical point of view. So, again, we're going to look at the place of origin so we know what culture we're talking about. Well, this takes place in Persia, and as I've said in previous lesson, Persia, the country of Persia no longer exists. It would be modern day Iran. So if you're looking at a map, Iran is in what we call the Middle East. It's a pretty cool country, very far away from here, though. The lesson learned when we finish reading the story is that being caring, patient, and compassionate is important. Compassionate meaning that you care for others, that you understand what they're going through, and you are nice to them, in time of need. And our next question is, how do we know this? Well, in the Persian Cinderella, if you have the physical book in front of you, there is an author's note. And I love this because this is some really cool work by the author. The prince's name is Murdad. Well, in the Persian language of the time, Murdad means literally compassion. So if we, use our text features like we've talked about in the past and we read the author's note, then we get a better understanding of what the character is like, but in a greater sense here, the values of the culture. So the prince's name quite literally translates into compassion. Right? We also see that the Cinderella character Setraya, she in the marketplace when she has her nice clothes from the magic jug, she gives an old woman the coins her dad had given her. So she passes it on down the line, is very caring and compassionate to those less fortunate, even though her herself didn't have very much. And we see a kind of a small little behavior. We see that the prince patiently takes care of the injured turtle dove. It seems like a small behavior, but it shows that such a powerful man can take the time to just show a lot of patience and care for something seemingly as insignificant or unimportant as just a small little injured bird. So this just happens to be, not even happens, this is probably done on purpose. We can see exactly what this culture really values, right? And I think it's a good way to learn about that culture and kind of learn something that we may not have learned before about them. Okay? Let's take a quick review and we'll shut her down for our fairy tale unit. Bam! Review. Fairy tales are often teach the reader a lesson. I would bet that's probably a 10 out of 10 times. The lessons and outcomes in fairy tales often reflect what the culture values. And I'd like to make a quick note of that is fairy tales were written um, typically hundreds of years ago. And so when books and stories are written for the first time, they often reflect the values of the culture at that time. Okay? Um, and so, but in the examples today, the lessons we learned from these stories, pretty solid lessons to learn even today, and pretty strong values that I believe those two cultures still adhere to. The author does their part in helping us. The author will include clues to help the reader, like character names, like the prince in the Persian Cinderella, seemingly non important behaviors, like caring for an injured bird. And like we saw in Domitilla, the inclusion of proverbs or wise sayings, and possibly even like a wise character that kind of just, gives that really wise saying and wisdom when we need, when the character needs it the most. All right, guys, we have wrapped up our unit on fairy tales. Man, what a cool unit. All right. You guys have done awesome. You guys have rocked this unit. As always, you know who I am. Off camera this week, I'm Mr. Remedies. You guys have been fantastic. And we will see you next week. Adios, guys.